Hi there, Mrs. Elke here. Today I wanted to show you a little booklet that you can make that is kind of a study on complementary colors. So my colors that I chose are orange and blue. And of course I made this on the computer first, printed it off, then painted it. But you could even just write it in or draw it in. I decided to do the tints and shades of each of the complementary colors. I also wanted to do some texture practice like sponge painting, splattering, sgraffito, impasto, some different ways to apply the paint, and then some different ways of blending, so blending and glazing. And then I also wanted to show some ways that you can desaturate the colors. So this both started with orange, and I used gray to desaturate or blue to desaturate, and then did some little mini mock-up landscapes using just those complementary colors. So a couple different activities that you can try. I'm going to walk you step by step through each of those just in case you want to try it on your own, and then you can kind of jump off of this and do a project based on complementary colors. Here's a close-up of my book here so you can see kind of all of the things that I have on each page. And then now that you've kind of taken a look, I will go ahead and walk you through the steps. So I found that it's easiest to start off with my book or my paper laid out flat. And the first thing I needed to do was pick my complementary colors. And reminder that complementary colors are opposite of each other on the color wheel. So blue is opposite of orange, purple's opposite of yellow, and red is opposite of green. So I am doing blue and orange. And once I have put those on the cover of my book, I am moving on to the hues, tints, and shades portion. And I'm going to get that done. So I started with blue, as you can see. The blue goes in the hue box, and then above that, the tints, you add a little bit of white with the color, and then for the shades, you add a little bit of black to the color, and then you will have a nice value scale using that blue. So we've got the lightest on the top, and then you can see it gradually gets darker towards the bottom with the blue as the center section. I will do the same thing with my orange in the section right next to it. You can see I went ahead and did that. Now, for the other elements of my book here, I wanted to show different ways you can apply paint, add texture, just some different painting techniques. So I am starting off by painting in the splattering, the sgraffito, and the glaze, all with just a color. And I'm going to let that dry. And then here I want to go ahead and do my sponge. And sometimes it actually helps to use, some scratch paper just to protect the box a little bit. I'm going to dip my sponge in on both sides here of my paint, and then I will add that in, trying to kind of create a little bit of a mixture of the two as they meet in the middle, so that you can see a little bit of the blue and orange mix. And then I can take my scrap paper off here, and that's good for my sponge. All right. For my blending one, I'm going to go ahead and get some orange on mostly one side, and then I clean my brush really well and get some blue on the other side while the orange is still wet. And then I want to try to kind of brush between the two to blend them together and try to get a little mixture of both. Now again, if you don't have a paper where you've printed all this out like I have, you can always just make your own boxes and make sure to label each thing as you go. So you can see I added some blue, I added a little bit more orange in. I'm trying to kind of go back and forth between the two to get a nice mixture or a nice blend from one to the other. For the glaze, notice my orange is already dry. I'm adding blue on top of the orange, and then I'm just going to thin it out. You can either use a medium to thin it out, or in my case, I'm just adding a little bit of water to thin it out to try to get kind of a nice even glaze to make the blue kind of gradually turn into the orange. So it's just kind of another way of doing it. Usually a glaze indicates some thinner paint that you can almost see through. It's almost transparent so that you can see some of that color underneath. So the next thing I want to tackle here is going to be these two sections over here on the right. This is basically desaturating the color, and you can pick either one. I decided to go with orange. And desaturating basically means to make it less bright, make it less colorful. So there's two methods we're using here. There's one where you're adding the complement, so blue in my case. For the other one, you're just adding gray. So black and white mixed together make gray, and then you're adding a little bit more and more gray to your color. And so there should be a little bit of a difference there in what you get as a result. So just trying to various ways to kind of tone down the color, desaturate the color. All right, for the impasto section, I'm using a palette knife and I'm just basically thickly applying the paint. And it doesn't always have to be with a palette knife. You could do this with a brush too, but I find that a palette knife is an easy way to really get nice thick layers of paint on there. So I'm just adding some blue and some orange with my palette knife and then really laying them on nice and thick so that I get a nice covering here of paint on my impasto square. And again, labeling if you don't have that. For my sgraffito square, I am adding blue on top of my already dry orange. And then while my blue is wet, I'm going to scratch out some of the paint. So you can do any type of technique. I'm just adding little marks or little waves or lines, but it's just to try to get that scratched technique here into that paint. So just another technique to get some interesting texture as you paint. And then for splattering, I want to go ahead and put some paper up again just to kind of protect my square here or everything around my square. And I like to just put my finger out and kind of use that to splatter the paint on. If you don't want to get your finger covered in paint, you can also just tap the brush on your finger, but it does need to be pretty wet. All right, the last square or rectangles, I guess you would say, on my little booklet here are just little thumbnail landscapes. So just to kind of play around with using only complementary colors as you create. The goal of my little thumbnail landscapes is to try to have at least 3 values, so a light, a medium, and a dark, and then to also use a mixture of my 2 complementary colors, blue and orange. And I will be adding a little bit of white as well. I'm trying to avoid black, or if I do, maybe just have it mixed with one of the colors. But you can usually get really dark darks just by mixing your complementary colors together. So I'm going to go ahead and just make up whatever landscapes I want. This first one here, I'm just doing a little sky and then some distant hills, and then I'm kind of bringing it down in, and then I have some water in the front, and then I might add a tree or something just to kind of give me a little bit more depth. So you can see I have a couple different values going on. I've got some lights, some mediums, and some darks, and have just nice little landscape. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It's just to kind of practice using the different colors and won't get overly complex. For my second one, I just want to try a different landscape. So I'm going with an orange sky instead of a blue sky. And then maybe instead I can play around with using blue in the ground. So trying a mixture of the two would be good too. Maybe mixing my orange and blue a little bit. So just trying to play around with the different options that you have creating a little mini landscape or a thumbnail out of just two complementary colors, and in this case white as well. So you can see my sky is the lightest value. I've got these mountains as a medium value. I'm making my ground the darkest value. So I already have my three values. I mixed a little bit of blue with my orange for my ground to make my orange a little bit darker and a little bit less saturated. And then I can do even more blue when I create these cacti, making some saguaros and some other desert plants for my little desert scene here. So just a little fun exercise to practice using your two complementary colors to create a little mini landscape. At this point, I need to turn my pictures into an actual little booklet. So I'm going to fold my paper in half this way. I'm going to cut it with my scissors just to the first line so that I can fold it in half and turn it into a book. So you can see I've got a hole in the middle. I'm folding it in half. I squish it together kind of like this and then try to flatten it out. And once you get all of these nice and flat, you should be able to turn it into a little booklet that you can then turn the pages. So there's my cover, there are my value scales, my texture and paint application studies, and then my little blending and glazing and desaturation, and my thumbnail landscapes. Hope you enjoyed playing with complementary colors.